I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. Before we get into today's project, I wanted to take a moment and talk about the goals of Old Sneelock's Workshop. I know, after 1,100 and some odd videos, it's kind of odd to be talking about the goals, but had kind of an epiphany this morning. I realized that I'd never talked about what the goals of Old Sneelock's Workshop are. My goals are to teach you something. At the same time, I learn from you. And the way we do that is we have conversations, mostly in the comments. Sometimes I actually get a chance to talk to you outside the video arena, and that's always a pleasure. I talk to you on Facebook, I talk to you here in the videos, I talk to you personally. All those things are wonderful. But my goal is to teach you something. And the way I teach you is I do the task and show you and tell you what I'm doing. Best thing you can do is ask me questions about why I did what I did. Sometimes I don't even know. It's just the way that I've always done it. Now, the way that I've always done it is because that's the way that worked. Worked the first time, I do it again. I try and learn something new every day, and you help me a lot with that. So, having got all that out of the way, let's start with our today's project. I like to do things step by step. And I want to also tell you that the bathroom is completed. We won't be talking about bathroom for a while, at least not if I have any choice in it. Yesterday I showed you the saw that I got at the restore. It's a nice saw, but it had a problem. The blade in it was a plywood blade, and when I tried to cut a piece of wood with it, it basically burned its way through. Changed the blade, it cut quite nicely. That tells me that blade is dull. So I'm going to take this opportunity to show you how to sharpen a circular saw blade. Not necessarily the way that everybody else does it. This is the way that I do it. Now, I have a lot of machines that are set up to sharpen circular saw blades, but I'm going to show you the hand way. Why do I do that? Why do I focus on hand tools and doing things the hard way? Well, to me, the hard way is always the most likely to be able to be done everywhere. If I can do something with a simple file that other people have to do with a milling machine, and I can show you how I do it with a file, that means that you can do things with a file that takes a milling machine for the average guy to do. We all have files available to us, and if we don't, we have a way to get one. So we'll start out today sharpening a circular saw blade. First thing I did with the saw blade is I took this box, which happens to be a cookie box. You know, I like to use anything that is available. This is a box that just seems to fit circular saw blades. And it's nice because quite often the thing that I need to do first is take all the gunk off the saw blade. They come to me with pine tar on them and all kinds of crap. Now I could take a wire brush and go after this and aggressively attack it, or I can take the simple way and use something called grease lightning. Now, I'd seen where one of you guys mentioned using grease lightning, and I thought, oh yeah, I've got some of that. And it's what I use to clean saw blades, and also lots of other stuff. Now the reason I'm using rubber gloves, had a little bit of surgery the other day and I had a mole removed. I really don't want to get anything down into that cut. So even though grease lightning doesn't really bother your skin, it burns if it gets in a cut. After soaking this blade in grease lightning overnight, the crap that gets on the teeth just basically scrubs right off. Now this is a brass wire brush. Why am I using a brass wire brush? Well, the steel wire brush is actually harder than the blade. and I don't want to dull the teeth any more than what they are. So by using the brass wire brush, which is softer than the steel blade, I'm not damaging the teeth at all. Now some of you guys are probably already shutting off the channel and saying, well, I don't need to watch this because I always use carbide blades. You can. Carbide blades are actually quite handy. I use them on quite a few of my saws, especially saws that I'm using to cut recycled materials. Anything that's pretty crappy, got nails in it. But it's not necessarily the best tool for every job. Tool steel has the ability to be sharp. Carbide is very tough, and it can be sharp, but in a different way. Because it's brittle, you can't have a really thin edge. They act more like scrapers than knives. And scraping your way through a piece of wood isn't always the best method. Now this is a 7 1/4 Oldham 140 tooth OSB and plywood blade. I shouldn't be able to do that on a steel blade. Now this is a very sad little carbide blade that has been treated roughly. It still has all its teeth, which is kind of unusual for a carbide blade that comes into my shop, because most of them come from somebody's saw that's seen a hard life. This one is only missing one tooth right there. Now missing one tooth isn't a catastrophe. You have all these other teeth that still cut. But missing a tooth means that the saw blade is less effective. It also means somebody tried to cut something they shouldn't have, or they dropped it. Carbide teeth are very, very strong. They can take a lot of heat, and they don't wear away when cutting resistant materials. You can actually use this saw blade to cut cast iron with. It doesn't like it. It usually dulls the teeth, but carbide blades will cut anything softer than they are. Most tool steel blades, like this one, if you run this up against iron, it's going to take the teeth out in a heartbeat. The teeth on this saw have come up against something rather hard. It has effectively jointed the blade. Looking at the tips of the teeth, now just like filing a handsaw, the first thing I want to do is I want to mark the teeth. That way I'll know when I've got them filed. Helps me keep track of where I'm at. Because this is filed rip, that means that the file goes across at a 90-degree angle to the plate. Now, just like filing a handsaw, I'm going to go 2 strokes at a time. Now, why 2 strokes? Because it typically takes at least 2 strokes to make a difference to the tooth. And I don't want to take a tooth that doesn't need a whole lot of filing and take off more metal than I need to. Now, if I was going to be doing a whole lot of circular saws by hand, I think I want to make a jig. Much sharper than it was. Right now, I would expect somebody to be asking a question. And since you're not sitting here next to me, which would be a live broadcast, basically, we can't do the direct question and answer. So I have to anticipate your questions. That puts me in the position of thinking back to myself, why am I doing this? Rip teeth are filed like chisels. All they have to be is straight across. Crosscut teeth have to have knife edges because they're cutting through the side of the grain. And if you try and go through the side of the grain with a chisel, it splits, it doesn't cut. Rip teeth are cutting the end of the grain. And since this is a plywood blade, it sees more or less a combination of ingrained and cross grain. The first saws were actually all rip cut. It wasn't until Middle Ages that they started making teeth on saws with the knife edges of a crosscut blade. Prior to that, everything was filed rip. It's easier. It's a sturdy edge. It cuts well. Just doesn't cut cross grain as well as a crosscut saw does. Because these are filed like chisels, straight across, I don't need to do the angles. So therefore I can just file every tooth individually, same as we go. I don't have to skip a tooth. File this direction, skip a tooth, file that direction, skip a tooth, like I would with a crosscut. Makes it easier to file rip teeth. I don't have to remember which way I'm going. And where I stop and start doesn't really matter as much, as long as I don't file the same tooth over and over. Now we're almost all the way around here. with 140 teeth. This saw takes quite a bit of time. Now we have sharp teeth all the way around. What I'm doing here is looking at the tips of the teeth to make sure that I've got each one filed. They all appear to be just fine. So now we'll try the blade on this saw again. And it is 17 millimeter. I don't have a feeling either way for a metric part. The only thing that annoys me is when metric parts are interspersed with imperial parts. It makes it so it's confusing. The last thing I need in the world is to have things be confusing. When I put the blade on, I want to make sure and have the teeth pointing forward. This is a sidewinder, which means the blade is on the right hand side of the saw. When I'm looking at it, the blade runs counterclockwise. Okay, I got the blade mounted. I like these little things for putting the cords on saws. I can wrap it up and not have it fall loose, and I don't have to wrap it around the blade or have it get damaged. I'm going to leave the saw unplugged for just a minute, because I want to set up my test piece. Unlike a hand-powered saw, this circular saw makes a lot of noise. Now this was the first cut I did with it yesterday. You can see that the blade was burning through. It wasn't really cutting. This is the cut I made with this blade. Even though it isn't sharp, it cut a lot better. It has a lot fewer teeth, and it is slightly sharper than what this plywood blade was originally. This is the difference. This is the piece of wood after sharpening. This is the piece of wood before sharpening. This one's actually glazed off where the blade burned it. It's shiny. This one, dull. This one was actually having the fibers sliced. Now that's with a rip cut saw. Since this blade is for cutting OSB and plywood, we'll take this sacrificial piece of plywood and we'll knock a chunk out of it. Now that's another nice cut. 140 tooth blade, no splinter, no tear out. Does a nice job. Whether I'm doing cross cutting or cutting plywood, and I suppose if I did a rip, I could do a fairly good job with a rip too. But all with a little bit of work with a file. If we start talking about a blade like this one, I don't even need a 3-cornered file. Mill Bastard will do a nice job. I can touch the top of the teeth, come in and the gullet, do a good job. I'll be doing this one later. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.